Xbox is one of the most recognizable names in gaming today. They stand as the last true competitor to Sony, yet they still hold the title of being the least relevant of the three console manufacturers. However, at one point in time, Xbox was on top of the console world, beating out both Nintendo and Sony within their first 10 years of existence. So what happened to Xbox? Today, I want to talk about Xbox's rise to power, their dominance in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and how Xbox fell off. In the late 1990s, Sony was dominating the home gaming market with the original PlayStation. While announcing the PlayStation 2, Sony positioned the console as the only device that customers would need, as the system played CDs and DVDs and ran Linux on top of its gaming capabilities. Microsoft saw the PS2 as a threat to the PC market, so in 1998, Bill Gates tasked a few internal teams at Microsoft to come up with a video game console that would completely outclass PS2 and refocus interests into home computers. The console to be was given the codename Midway, a reference to the Americans' decisive victory over the Japanese in World War II. There were two prominent teams leading the development of Midway. The first team, the DirectX team, wanted the main focus of the system to be software, and then simply build the console out of off-the-shelf PC parts. The other team, the Web TV team, wanted to build Midway from the ground up instead of using off-the-shelf PC parts like the DirectX team suggested. The two would remain at odds until both teams met with Bill Gates on May 5, 1999. In the year of development, Ed Fries, the head of Microsoft's gaming division, came to support the DirectX team's vision of Midway. This was because the DirectX console included a hard drive, which would allow the system to have direct online capabilities. Bill Gates also agreed, as well as liking how easy it would be to port PC games to the system, due to it running on a modified version of Windows 2000 and DirectX 8.1. Throughout the development of Midway, problems kept emerging with the system. For example, while initially planning on making a contract with third parties to produce the hardware for the console, the early stages of planning revealed to the team that they needed to be manufactured by Microsoft, further driving up the cost of the project. Despite these unforeseen costs and the addressing of them in the now infamous Valentine's Day Massacre, Xbox would be revealed to the public at the Game Developers Conference on March 10, 2000, a few days after the PS2 had come out in Japan. Microsoft ultimately ended up naming the console after its internal nickname, the DirectXbox, which was often shortened to just Xbox in emails. It was put on the list of possible names for the console's focus test to prove to the developers how unpopular the name would be, but it ended up being the most popular name on the list. Microsoft would fully unveil the system with a presentation from the heads of Xbox, Bill Gates, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson at CES 2001. They would unveil the final design of the console and talk about some of its software and hardware features, such as Xbox Live and Halo. Its launch date and price would be revealed at E3 2001, as well as some of the games coming to the system at or around its launch period. The original Xbox launched on November 15, 2001 in North America at a price of $299, the same price as a PS2. The system launched with a total of 19 games, however the only title that really mattered at launch was Halo. Halo Combat Evolved is, in my opinion, the sole reason that Xbox is around today. Although Xbox Live and a built-in hard drive were a massive step forward for the industry, the other console manufacturers were already moving toward adding these features to their consoles. In fact, the PS2 already had the ability to add on both a modem and a hard drive. Halo, however, was totally unique to Microsoft's platforms, except for the Mac port, but that doesn't count. This wouldn't have mattered if the game was only decent, but Halo was much more than that. It was a revolution in the first-person shooter genre, standardizing most of the features that modern FPS games are built around, such as a twin-stick setup for the camera and movement, and the ability to pick up fallen enemies' weapons, instead of being stuck to the same gun. Add on top of these groundbreaking features some of the best AI ever seen in an FPS and a genuinely compelling story, and you have yourself one of the best games of all time. Best of all, Halo could only be run on Xbox, due to its built-in hard drive. Although it would get PC and Mac ports, those versions of the game ran nowhere near as good, and came out several years later. Microsoft wouldn't let Halo do all the work either, as they were buying up several studios to make exclusive games for the system. The most notable of these was Rare, a company that worked closely with Nintendo in the previous generation and made classic games such as GoldenEye 007 and Banjo-Kazooie. Several major first-party exclusives would be released for the system, giving Xbox a wide variety of genres for players to enjoy. Some of the more notable titles are Crimson Skies, Fusion Frenzy, Ninja Gaiden, and Fable. The amazing first and third-party games being released throughout the first year of the Xbox meant gamers had a massive variety of games to choose from, while Xbox was working on their next big selling point. Exactly 1 year after the launch of the Xbox, Xbox Live would be rolled out for the system. This feature was one of the biggest selling points for Xbox, even being touted before the system launched at E3. Although you had to pay for Xbox Live, many found it to be worth it for the features that it sported. Not only did it allow Xbox players to play online, but it made it much easier for people to play with their IRL friends online with the introduction of gamer tags. Simply ask your friends who play on Xbox for their gamer tag, search it up, and add them as a friend. Xbox Live also had the ability for gamers to talk to others utilizing the Xbox Party system, or in-game chat features, something not all PS2 online titles supported. Halo Combat Evolved was a massive success that almost single-handedly gave the Xbox meaning. However, Xbox Live didn't have a title like that at launch. And while the titles that did support Live were received mostly well by players, gamers wanted to play the amazing multiplayer that Halo offered online. Bungie would deliver following a massive marketing campaign, more akin to advertising you would see for a console. Halo 2 featured a grander story, more gameplay components, and, most anticipated, online capabilities. Once again, Halo would revolutionize the gaming industry by implementing matchmaking. Despite this seeming like a no-brainer now, many console games from the 6th generation had players manually join lobbies for the games instead. Matchmaking allowed for a steady flow of more unique gameplay to occur, as well as more competitive play thanks to the skill system that was implemented. Despite Microsoft's best efforts, Xbox would not be able to topple the empire that Sony had built for themselves over the last decade. Although they were able to beat out Nintendo's GameCube, it was only a minor victory. When all was said and done, Xbox had sold a total of 24 million units, which isn't bad for a first console. But when looking at the competition, yeah, it's easy to look back and see the Xbox as a failure. Regardless of the numbers, the Xbox team proved its point to Microsoft. There was a market for another competitor in the console space. The next generation of Xbox would move full steam ahead. Xbox 360, or Xbox 2 as it was internally referred to during development, was conceived as early as 2003. The Xbox team had looked back on their first battle with Sony to find anything that they could improve on. It was during this analysis that the Xbox team realized that they needed to launch before the next PlayStation. The rumor at the time was Sony was aiming to launch holiday 2005, so Microsoft planned to, at the very least, have Xbox 360 on shelves as soon as Sony did. It was due to this that the 360 had an incredibly short development cycle, taking only 2 years to go from concept to reality. This would end up producing disastrous results for the console, but we'll talk about that later. For now, all that's important is that the Xbox 360 used a custom-made CPU and GPU based on PowerPC architecture, which was developed for the system by IBM. The 360 would be revealed on MTV Presents on May 12, 2005. It was a spectacle show, hosted by 2000's icon Elijah Wood. During the event, the console would be shown off, which revealed a radical redesign from the original console. It was white instead of black, and featured far sleeker casing. Less than a week later at E3 2005, Microsoft would go further in depth about the Xbox 360 and its features. They would first announce that the system would be backwards compatible with the best-selling original Xbox games. This would be followed up by the new user interface and the completely reworked gamer card system. At its core, the gamer card was just a user's display name, but now it also carried information such as reputation, gamer score, zone, and games that were recently played. Finally, they would show off the Xbox 360 Marketplace, where DLC would be released by both the developers and the Xbox community. All of these features were available for free, which was a major step forward for Xbox, who had locked most of their online features behind a paywall in the previous generation. Xbox 360 would be released on November 22, 2005. It was an instant hit, with it selling through its entire initial batch of consoles upon release in all regions except Japan. Almost 40,000 units appeared on eBay during the initial week of release, about 10% of all consoles available. Alongside its launch, gamers had 18 games to choose from, not counting Xbox Live Arcade. Although most of the games were nothing special, there were still some titles to keep gamers entertained while they waited for the next generation of gaming to truly start. Call of Duty 2, Gun, Need for Speed Most Wanted, Project Gotham Racing 3, and Ridge Racer 6 were some of the more notable titles that showed off the console's graphical and online capabilities. Microsoft would also have Rare develop 2 games for the console, Perfect Dark Zero, a prequel to the N64 classic Perfect Dark, and Cameo, Elements of Power, a new IP from Rare that never got the full attention that it deserved. Over on Sony's side, preparations for the launch of PlayStation 3 were underway. Although Sony had initially planned to launch the system in holiday 2005, more work needed to be done on the system. They would opt to push back the release date by a year, leaving the Xbox 360 alone on the market for an entire year, the same thing that happened in the previous generation with the PS2. To top it all off, Sony's use of experimental technologies such as Blu-ray and the cell processor dramatically drove up the production costs of PS3, which in turn drove up the price for consumers. This put Sony's cheapest console at $500. For comparison, the most expensive Xbox 360 bundle sold for $400. Sony thought that consumers would still flock to their side, as after the previous generation they felt that gamers only cared about the launch of PS3. They couldn't be more wrong. Xbox executives cheered when they heard the starting price point for PS3. Fans were outraged, and many were turned off by the high price, as well as the lack of games shown for the system. From the outside, it looked like Sony had lost its way, and Xbox was the only real alternative. However, things weren't looking great on Xbox's side either. As more consumers got their hands on the 360, it appeared as if more and more consoles were defective. The 2 most common problems were the system destroying the outer edge of DVDs when placed into the disk drive, and the 3 LED lights around the power button turning red, signifying a general hardware failure. The disk scratching, to be fair, usually only occurred when the console was moved while a game was running, which is something that I wouldn't recommend doing to a console anyways. The general hardware failure, however, was a much more pressing issue. Dubbed the Red Ring of Death, many of the cases of general hardware failure were caused by connectors breaking inside of the console, due to the extreme temperature changes of turning the system on and off. This was likely due to the rushed production of the 360, as mass production only began 69 days before the launch of the console. To this day, Microsoft has not released the official failure rate of the original Xbox 360. Estimates put the failure rate at around 54.2%. Microsoft would ignore the problem until July 2007, when the then head of Xbox, Peter Moore, addressed the public and announced a 3-year warranty extension to all Xbox 360s, and refunds for anyone who paid to have their Xbox repaired. They also decided to stop production of the 360 temporarily to figure out a better remedy for the defects. When all was said and done, Microsoft spent $1.15 billion combating the Red Ring of Death, and it could have spelled the end for the Xbox brand. But just as things were looking their darkest, another staple of Xbox came to turn things around. Right in the middle of the Red Ring of Death crisis, Microsoft's most anticipated game of the generation launched. Halo 3 was already bound to be big, as Halo 2 left gamers on one of the most infamous cliffhangers of all time. However, its launch was a much bigger deal than anyone could ever predict. On September 25th, over 10,000 retailers in the US held midnight launch parties for the game, and sales of the game made $170 million in the first day, the most amount of money generated in that time frame for an American-made entertainment property up to that point. By the end of September, Halo 3 had sold 3.3 million copies worldwide, and took a lot of the negative press off of Microsoft. Many fans eagerly waited to see what Microsoft had in store for the future of Xbox. Little did they know that Xbox had already peaked, and now they would change forever. On July 17, 2007, head of Xbox Peter Moore would leave the company to join the sports division of EA. This was a major blow to the Xbox team, as he was an industry veteran, previously working at Sega and handling the launch of the Dreamcast. He would be replaced by former president of Worldwide Studios of EA, Don Mattrick. To add to their losses, their most influential developer since the launch of the first Xbox, Bungie, announced that they would be leaving Microsoft shortly after the launch of Halo 3. For the next couple of years, not much would be done by Microsoft to further entice new gamers to join the Xbox family, with them instead releasing several sequels to pre-existing series. After the launch of Halo 3, Microsoft seemed directionless, until they revealed what they had been working on behind the scenes. At E3 2009, Don Mattrick and Steven Spielberg came on stage to reveal Project Natal, later named Kinect. It was an infrared-based motion sensor that was intended to make gamers a controller. It was Microsoft's answer to Nintendo's Wii, which used a radical new controller that brought about a whole new way to play games, and in turn, appealed to an untapped market of people for the video game industry. The casuals. It was a huge market, and Sony and Microsoft wanted in. Sony developed PlayStation Move, which were essentially just Wii Remote add-ons for the PS3, and they never saw much use until PSVR launched during the PS4 years. Kinect, however, was a massive deal for Microsoft. The whole project was backed by Mattrick, and Microsoft would call it as vital to the brand as Xbox Live. Kinect would launch on November 4th, 2010 to great initial success. Alongside the new Kinect sensor, Microsoft would release a much-needed revision of the Xbox 360, making it smaller and less prone to red ringing. However, the Kinect had some issues that bogged down the experience for the casual players that Microsoft was trying to target. For starters, the motion tracking was nowhere near as accurate as shown, and many of the controls felt awkward to make without anything to hold. It was also priced ridiculously high, starting at $150, 3 times more than both the Wii Remote and PS Move. This would lead to sales dropping off relatively fast for the Kinect, with it not selling many more units after 2011. However, this would not stop Microsoft from continuing to push the Kinect, as from 2010 to 2012, the focus was shifted from hard-hitting Xbox exclusive to Kinect games, with the occasional first-party game releasing now and then. Still, in that time frame, Kinect sold 10 million units, and Microsoft saw it as an overwhelming success, leading to perhaps the biggest disaster for the Xbox brand. Reports began to surface in May of 2011 that the next generation of Xbox was in development, with it reportedly becoming available to developers in mid-2012. In late 2012, a rumor began to pop up that the next generation Xbox console, codenamed Durango, would require players to be connected to the internet for their console to work. For months, many would simply deny the rumor, as it was seen as a death sentence to the Xbox brand. But what would really happen was so much worse than anyone could have imagined. On May 21st, 2013, Xbox One would be revealed to the world. The first 30 minutes of the presentation focused on the console's TV watching capabilities, which was then followed up by the unveiling of the next generation of Kinect. The Kinect was revealed to be included with every Xbox One, which drove the console's price to $500. On top of that, the Kinect would have to be plugged into the Xbox One at all times for the console to function. This was done in hopes that if developers knew that all Xbox One owners had a Kinect and had it plugged in at all times, they would be more open to using the Kinect over a standard controller. Later on during the unveiling, Microsoft would confirm the rumors about the Xbox One DRM. The console would need to connect to Xbox Live at least once every 24 hours to validate the game tokens. This would effectively get rid of physical game sharing with your family and friends, as well as making retailers that sell secondhand games obsolete. This policy would also mean that those without a stable internet connection would be unable to use the console at all. Gamers were furious, and despite all the negative feedback they were receiving, Microsoft continued to push forward, with them stating that all the issues that the community had was just where the future of gaming was going, and that they wanted to get ahead of the curve. Microsoft and Xbox leadership were so convinced that they were in the right, and that they were the only company that people cared about, that they were just going to keep pushing this policy until people stopped caring. Until Don Mattrick gave one of the most infamous quotes in all of gaming history.
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
The backlash to this statement was massive. People were upset, and this time, Microsoft realized what a massive mistake they had made. Sony, on the other hand, saw that Microsoft had dropped the ball with their reveal, and just as Microsoft had done in the previous generation, they took full advantage of it. They released the now iconic How to Share a Game on PS4 commercial.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
As well as taking further jabs at Microsoft during E3. Following their E3 press conference, Microsoft would release a statement informing gamers that Xbox One would not require an internet connection to validate the game tokens. However, for most, this was too little too late, and many gamers pledged their allegiance to Sony's next-gen console instead. Don Mattrick, who was largely seen as the person responsible for this mess, left Microsoft shortly after announcing the reversal of Xbox One DRM policies to become the CEO of Zynga. Mattrick would be replaced by the current head of Xbox, Phil Spencer. Xbox One would launch on November 22, 2013 and sold decently well in the first few days, with it even selling 1 million units in the first 24 hours of availability. After December 2013, Microsoft would no longer give official sales updates, with the last official total being 3 million units sold. At launch, there was a mandatory update that would remove the DRM policy and the need for Kinect to be connected to the console for it to function. A few months later, in March 2014, Microsoft began selling the Xbox One without the Kinect bundled in to drop the price to $400, the same price as the PS4. As the months continued, the Kinect would no longer be bundled with the Xbox One, instead being sold separately. Even if the price was lower, Microsoft was still missing two things that Sony had that would prevent them from ever truly catching up. First, Sony now had the trust of the gaming industry. After the unveiling, many gamers who had a 360 in the previous generation became disillusioned with Microsoft, and saw that Sony had learned from their mistakes in the later years of the PS3. They, unlike Microsoft, truly seemed to have the consumer in mind. Secondly, Microsoft was severely lacking in must-have exclusives for the Xbox One. Where Nintendo and Sony were both working on first-party games for their respective systems, Microsoft was seemingly content with allowing third-party developers to do all the work for them. And when an exclusive game was announced for Xbox One, it would usually come alongside a PC version as well. Although not a bad thing, it gave far less incentive for gamers to buy an Xbox, as they could just play the new releases on their computer anyways. In many ways, the Xbox console had become obsolete. After Phil Spencer became head of Xbox in 2014, the goal of the brand changed. It seemed for a while that Microsoft wanted to turn things around and improve the reputation of Xbox One amongst gamers. At E3 2015, Phil Spencer announced a goal of having 100 Xbox 360 games available for backwards compatibility by the end of the year, with the promise of more games to come in the future. Although it wasn't much, it was a sign that Microsoft was trying to get the customers' goodwill back. 2016 would be another uninteresting year, with the exception of the Xbox One S. The One S would replace the standard console, and was smaller and more powerful than the first model, although it was still not capable of 4K gaming. On June 1st, 2017, Microsoft would launch Game Pass for Xbox consoles and PC. It was a clever idea, putting both new and old games into a subscription service for around $10 a month. A few weeks later at E3 2017, Microsoft's commitment to bettering the platform became clear. During the event, they would unveil the Xbox One X, the most powerful console of the generation. Phil Spencer also announced that original Xbox backwards compatibility would be coming to the system, joining the now 400 Xbox 360 games available for backwards compatibility. They also announced that they would be bringing original Xbox games to their new Game Pass subscription in the near future. Throughout the presentation, they showed their dedication to bringing more exclusive games to the console, with them showing off 15 games that were exclusive to the Xbox in some way, as well as giving an official launch date to one of their most anticipated titles, Cuphead. In the following years, Microsoft would continue their dedication to making more games in-house, with them buying up several studios from 2018 to 2020. Compulsion Games, In Exile Entertainment, Ninja Theory, Obsidian Entertainment, Playground Games, Undead Labs, and Double Fine are just a few of the studios that Microsoft purchased during this time. Despite their best efforts, Microsoft couldn't shake the early impression that they had left on millions, causing them to lose to Sony once again. Despite another blow from Sony, Microsoft decided to push on to the next generation. The Xbox Series X and S are Microsoft's current-gen consoles. As of December 2023, they sit at a total of 27 million units sold, still sitting behind the PS5 and Nintendo Switch. Microsoft have also continued their goal of acquiring new studios, with the most recent acquisitions being ZeniMax, the parent company of several developers including Bethesda and Activision Blizzard, arguably one of the biggest third-party developers of all time. These purchases were made in an attempt to further drive up subscription numbers to Game Pass by adding the games these studios have previously developed onto the service. Phil Spencer has also been pushing heavily for more cross-platform endeavors, meaning that we may see more Xbox-related content on other platforms. Unfortunately for Microsoft, the horrors of the Kinect and the Xbox One still weigh heavy on many gamers' minds, which will always keep them behind Sony. Although, physical Xbox systems seem to not be the focus of Microsoft anymore, which makes sense seeing as they've always been a software company first and foremost. But there are even problems with that. People are starting to grow frustrated with their favorite franchises being bought up by industry giants just for them to add them to a subscription service instead of coming up with their own IPs. Then there's the ever-increasing cost of game development and marketing, with their most recent purchase, Activision, spending nearly $1 billion on the latest Call of Duty. As time goes on, Xbox seems less and less like the answer that Microsoft envisioned all those years ago. They bleed money on the brand, and it doesn't bring back much in return. If things continue to go the way they're going, I don't think there will be another Xbox, and the brand will die out, just like the other American game consoles. But, even though nowadays Xbox is in a pretty rough spot, its legacy can't be ignored. It brought online gaming into the mainstream and made millions take gaming seriously for the first time, bringing the industry to the point it's at today. Xbox may not be perfect, but they brought fun to millions, myself included. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.